They didn't shut the paper down. They just seized every single copy. And that's when it became clear. Either the truth comes out today, or it never does. The newsroom of the Beacon carried the low hum of fluorescent lights, punctuated by the rhythmic clatter of keyboards and the occasional rustle of papers. It was a place where deadlines collided with ideals, and where every decision could ripple through the lives of both journalists and the community they served. Leo leaned over his desk, eyes scanning the final drafts of his investigative report, the culmination of weeks of digging through city records, property deeds, and financial filings. He had uncovered a story that could shake the town to its core. Mayor Ward was exploiting public lands, the town's historic park, for personal development projects, enriching himself at the expense of the community. Every detail had been verified, every source corroborated. The numbers were precise, the documents airtight. Leo knew that once this story saw print, there would be no turning back. Yet amid the satisfaction of professional accomplishment, a shadow of doubt lingered, one he could not ignore. Across the room, Caitlin perched on the edge of her chair, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. At just 26, she carried the weight of the Beacon on her shoulders, having inherited the independent newspaper from her late father. Her youthful energy masked the careful, strategic mind that had kept the paper afloat through lean years and political battles. She glanced at Leo, tension tightening the lines of her face. "Leo," she said, voice controlled but laced with concern, "I've seen the draft. I've gone through it carefully. If this runs, we're looking at losing 70% of our advertising revenue. Ward and his partners won't just pull their ads. They'll launch lawsuits, drag this paper through court, and threaten every contract we have. We could be finished." Leo placed the papers firmly on her desk, meeting her gaze with unwavering determination. "Caitlin, the town deserves to know the truth. People have a right to understand what their mayor is doing with public land. I can't, and won't, ignore that. You know me. I can't bury this story." She ran a hand through her hair, the anxiety momentarily giving way to a flash of admiration. "I know your principles, Leo. I do. But the paper, it's our lifeline. I've spent years making sure the Beacon survives. You're asking me to gamble everything on a story that could destroy us. I'm asking you to step back, for the sake of survival." Leo shook his head, firm in his resolve. "I understand the risks. I understand the money. But the cost of silence, the cost of letting a corrupt mayor get away with exploiting the town, that's higher than anything financial. If we bury this story, we betray the very reason this newspaper exists. Everything I've worked for, everything we stand for, is on the line. And I can't compromise on that." Caitlin's eyes softened, a mixture of concern and reluctant admiration. "You make it sound so simple, as if truth alone can pay the bills," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But it's not simple. Not in the real world." "I don't expect it to be simple," Leo replied. His voice was steady, unyielding. "I expect it to be necessary." For a long moment, silence filled the newsroom. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting shadows across the stacks of papers, the walls lined with framed headlines, each a testament to the battles fought for integrity and transparency. Caitlin stared at the draft, her mind racing through every possible consequence: financial ruin, legal retaliation, threats from Ward's political machine. And yet, amid the fear, a spark of recognition grew. Here was someone unflinchingly committed to principle, someone willing to risk everything for the town, for the truth. I see why you do this," she admitted finally. "I see why you can't just step aside. But I also see the danger. I have to protect the paper, Leo. I have to keep it alive so that stories like yours can continue to exist." Leo's expression softened slightly, sensing the internal conflict. "And that's why I need you. Not to back me down, but to find a way through this, to make sure we survive and still tell the truth. We'll need every bit of ingenuity, every connection, and every ounce of courage to get through what's coming." The weight of responsibility hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Caitlin took a deep breath, realizing that leadership meant more than controlling outcomes. It meant choosing which battles were worth fighting, and which sacrifices could be endured without losing the soul of the paper. Leo's determination inspired her, but it also terrified her. Yet somewhere beneath the fear was the understanding that this fight, this moment, was bigger than both of them. It was about integrity, community, and the legacy of the Beacon. As the sun began to dip behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the desks, the newsroom grew quiet. Outside, the streets of the town were calm, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Inside, Leo and Caitlin shared a look that was unspoken but charged with understanding. The path ahead would demand courage, strategy, and unwavering commitment. Their professional partnership, fragile but full of potential, was now poised on the knife's edge between survival and ruin. And in that charged silence, amid the smell of ink and paper, a subtle tension lingered, an unspoken acknowledgement that the story they were about to publish could define not just the town, but their own destinies. It was the beginning of a journey that would test principles, forge alliances, and perhaps, in time, reveal something more personal beneath the shared struggle for truth. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the beacon, casting a soft glow over the stacks of papers and the faint scent of fresh ink. Leo had arrived early, already reviewing the layout of the trial issue he had printed overnight. He had taken a calculated risk, printing a limited proof edition before Caitlin had officially approved it, believing that once the story saw light, truth would have its own momentum. Caitlin entered the office, her expression a careful mask of calm, though her hands betrayed a subtle tremor. "Leo," she said, closing the door behind her. "We have a problem. Mayor Ward knows. He knows you printed the proof edition." Leo looked up from the proofs, his eyes steady. "I expected that. How bad is it?" She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her short, dark hair. "It's worse than I imagined. He called this morning. He's given me an ultimatum. Either you're gone, or he will destroy the paper entirely. Mass lawsuits, withdrawal of every ad contract, legal harassment, everything he can throw at us, all at once. He wants you out, Leo." Now, Leo's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. "And you? What are you going to do?" Caitlin sat heavily on the edge of her desk, staring at the proofs as if searching for answers in the inked pages. I can't fire you. I won't. This paper survives because of your integrity, your courage. But we don't have the financial cushion to withstand his full assault. We need time, Leo. Time to prepare. Time to find alternatives." He nodded slowly, recognizing the weight of her position. She was younger, yes, but the responsibility she carried was enormous. She had inherited the legacy of the Beacon, a paper built on decades of fighting for the truth, and now she had to balance principle with survival. "I understand," he said quietly. "So what's the plan?" Caitlin leaned forward, her fingers tracing the edges of the printed pages. "We'll keep the story under wraps for now, just enough to inform our most trusted contacts. I'll start reaching out to independent investors, alternative advertisers, maybe even a crowdfunding campaign. We need the community to see that the paper can survive without compromising on the truth." Leo's eyes softened with respect. "That's smart. We can't rely on tradition alone. We need to adapt, just like Ward is adapting his tactics to silence us." The tension in the office was palpable. Every decision they made now carried enormous consequences. Leo could see it in Caitlin's eyes. The weight of moral responsibility, the fear of failure, and the glimmer of determination that had drawn him to her as both a colleague and an unlikely partner in this battle. "There's another angle," Leo said, pulling up his laptop. "The proof edition may be limited, but the story is already starting to leak through our network. I've already received messages from a few local journalists and community leaders. People want to know. We have momentum, but we need to channel it carefully." Caitlin nodded, a small spark of relief flickering across her features. "Then we use that. Carefully, strategically. No reckless moves. We protect the paper while letting the story breathe. And Leo, we do this together. I can't do it alone." A faint smile touched his lips. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The room was quiet again, but this time the silence was different. It was charged with purpose, a shared understanding that they were stepping into a fight that would test every skill, every principle, and every ounce of courage they possessed. Ward's ultimatum had set the stage, but Leo and Caitlin were already thinking several moves ahead, plotting a strategy that could preserve the truth and, if they were careful, their paper. As Caitlin returned to her desk to make calls and draft potential crowdfunding pitches, Leo reviewed the proofs one last time. Outside, the town was unaware of the brewing storm within the walls of the Beacon. But the duo knew that soon, the quiet would be shattered, and their choices, calculated, principled, and daring, would decide not just the fate of a newspaper, but the balance between truth and survival in a town that had long been under the shadow of corruption. In that moment, a subtle bond formed between them, born from shared risk and mutual respect. The fight was no longer just about printing a story. It was about standing together against intimidation, about navigating the treacherous waters of power, and about discovering that even in the professional world, trust and loyalty could forge a partnership stronger than any legal threat. The town seemed to continue its day, unaware of the invisible storm brewing over its historic park and the small, independent newspaper that had dared to challenge the mayor. Inside the Beacon, however, the atmosphere was far from ordinary. Leo and Caitlin moved through the office with a shared sense of purpose, each action deliberate, each decision weighed with precision. Mayor Ward had already struck, filing the first wave of legal claims against the newspaper. Overnight, bank accounts had been frozen, advertising contracts put on hold, and legal notices stacked high on Caitlin's desk. The weight of the attack was immediate and overwhelming. Yet, rather than succumb to panic, Caitlin pivoted, drawing on her knowledge of finance to respond swiftly. She drafted emergency communications to independent investors, local philanthropists, and sympathetic community members, outlining the situation and the importance of keeping the paper alive. Leo, meanwhile, leveraged his journalistic skills to craft a narrative that would resonate beyond the office walls. He wrote letters to loyal readers, published discreet online updates, and subtly seeded the story of censorship to local influencers. His words framed the attack not as a defeat, but as an assault on truth itself. The story of the town's park, and the newspaper defending it, began to take shape, threading a narrative that drew attention without inviting immediate retaliation from Ward. It was during this intense coordination that Caitlin noticed something remarkable. She had always respected Leo for his principles, but now she saw his adaptability in action. He wasn't just stubborn, he was strategic. He understood the pulse of the public, the subtle levers of influence, and the rhythm of media in ways she hadn't fully appreciated before. "You're good at this," Caitlin admitted quietly, as they reviewed the draft for the crowdfunding campaign together. Her fingers traced a line across the printed pages, lingering over a carefully worded paragraph that highlighted the paper's mission without exposing vulnerabilities. Leo looked up from his laptop, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I've had practice fighting larger forces, but it helps to have a partner who knows how to navigate numbers, budgets, and risk. I couldn't do this alone either." For the first time, their professional skills truly began to complement each other. Leo's journalistic insight identified the angles that would engage the community, while Caitlin's financial acumen ensured that each campaign step was feasible and sustainable. Together, they turned what could have been a reactive scramble into a coordinated, multi-pronged defense. Hours passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and hasty meetings. By late evening, the first draft of the crowdfunding campaign was ready. Caitlin had lined up potential donors, while Leo had drafted social media posts, community letters, and press statements that framed the story as a fight against censorship. Each action reinforced the other's work, creating a synergy neither had experienced before. Amid the chaos, moments of quiet understanding flickered between them. When Leo paused to consider a particularly sensitive phrasing in the campaign, Caitlin offered a suggestion, not just practical, but empathetic to the emotional resonance of the message. In turn, Leo's instinctive storytelling brought nuance to Caitlin's financial projections, ensuring that the campaign would appeal to the town's sense of fairness and justice. By the time the office lights dimmed in preparation for the night shift, a subtle shift had occurred. Their relationship, once defined by cautious professionalism and underlying tension, had begun to evolve. Mutual respect had emerged from necessity, and with it, the first hints of trust, an essential foundation for the challenges that lay ahead. As they packed up for the night, Leo glanced at Caitlin, noting the resolute determination in her eyes. "Tomorrow will be hard," he said softly. Caitlin met his gaze evenly, her voice steady despite the fatigue. "We'll face it together. That's what partners do, right?" Leo nodded, feeling a quiet reassurance in her words. The partnership they were forging wasn't just about defending a newspaper. It was about aligning principles, talents, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. And though the storm from Ward had only just begun, Leo knew that with Caitlin by his side, they had a chance not only to survive, but to prevail. Outside, the town slept peacefully, unaware of the battle lines being drawn within the office of a small newspaper. But inside the beacon, a subtle transformation had taken place. Two determined professionals, united by purpose, had discovered that the sum of their skills and conviction was far greater than the threat posed by a corrupt mayor. And in that realization, a new chapter of their story had quietly begun. The newsroom was empty, except for the soft hum of the late-night lights and the occasional creak of the building settling. Outside, the city streets were quiet, but inside the beacon, tension crackled like static electricity. Leo and Caitlin had stayed behind to prepare a legally bulletproof version of the article, a condensed edition designed to delay Ward's onslaught without compromising the essence of the story. Every word, every line, had to withstand the scrutiny of a mayor who would use any loophole to silence them. Caitlin adjusted her chair nervously, the glow from her laptop reflecting off her sharp eyes. "We have to be extremely careful," she said, her voice low but firm. "If he discovers this before it's ready, it could mean lawsuits, police intervention, even criminal charges for us." Leo leaned over her shoulder, pointing at a paragraph. This section is phrased to highlight the public interest without naming specific contractors. It's subtle, but it still gets the point across. We can't afford a misstep. Hours passed as they worked, the office quiet but charged with an unspoken tension. Every clatter of a keyboard, every rustle of paper, felt amplified in the stillness. They were not just preparing a story. They were preparing for a confrontation, a battle in the shadows where one miscalculation could cost the paper everything. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed through the empty newsroom. A soft footstep, almost imperceptible against the hum of computers. Caitlin froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Did you hear that?" Leo's eyes narrowed. "Probably just the building," he said, though his tone carried a hint of skepticism. He stood and moved toward the door, listening carefully. Another creak, closer this time, made him stiffen. Ward's influence was far-reaching. Intimidation tactics were not out of the question. They exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between them. Without a word, Caitlin moved to block one side of the office while Leo positioned himself near the other, their movements instinctively protective. In that moment, the professional partnership deepened into a mutual reliance. They were not just colleagues, but allies in the truest sense. As the minutes stretched, the tension remained, but gradually, the noise proved to be nothing more than the old building groaning under its own weight. Still, the incident left a residue of heightened awareness, a reminder that the risks were real and constant. Returning to their desks, Caitlin exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. "I hate feeling this vulnerable," she admitted quietly. Leo glanced at her, his eyes softening. "You don't have to face it alone. We have each other's backs, Caitlin. Always." Her lips curved into a small, relieved smile. There was something in his steadfastness, the calm assurance beneath his quiet determination, that eased the fear coiling in her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel that subtle shift, an unspoken closeness born of shared danger and trust. They returned to the article, fingers flying over keyboards, the glow of the monitors illuminating the intensity on their faces. Every sentence was a calculated move, every paragraph a careful step in a game of high stakes. And as the night deepened, the boundaries between professional collaboration and personal connection began to blur ever so slightly. By the time dawn crept through the windows, painting the room in soft gold, the condensed edition was ready. It was concise, precise, and legally resilient, an armor against Ward's attempts at suppression. Caitlin leaned back in her chair, exhausted but satisfied. "We did it," she whispered, almost to herself, her eyes meeting Leo's across the desk. Leo nodded, a rare smile breaking his usually composed expression. "We did. Together." And in that quiet moment, amidst papers, computers, and the faint smell of printer ink, a new understanding had taken root. Their partnership had grown beyond strategy and skill. It had become trust, mutual respect, and the early spark of something neither of them could yet name. Outside, the town awoke, blissfully unaware that within the walls of a small, independent newspaper, two people had taken the first significant step toward defying corruption, protecting the truth, and discovering the depth of their own connection. The printing plant smelled of ink and warm metal, a familiar scent that usually brought Leo a sense of calm. This time it felt suffocating. The presses were already running when he and Caitlin arrived just before dawn, the first copies of the shortened edition sliding out in steady rhythm. It wasn't the full investigation, but it was enough to signal resistance, enough to show that the Beacon had not bowed its head. Caitlin stood with her arms crossed, watching the papers stack neatly on pallets. Her face was controlled, but Leo could see the tension in her jaw. She had spent the night calculating risks, margins, consequences. This print run was expensive, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. "If this buys us even a few days, it's worth it," Leo said quietly. Caitlin nodded. "I know. I just didn't expect him to move this fast." As if summoned by her words, the plant manager approached them, pale and visibly shaken. He didn't speak right away, just handed Caitlin a folded document. She took it, scanned the first lines, and felt the blood drain from her face. "What is it?" Leo asked. "An emergency court order," she said, her voice flat. "Temporary seizure of all printed material from the Beacon. Issued less than an hour ago." Before Leo could respond, the sound of boots echoed through the building. Uniformed local police officers entered the printing hall, followed closely by a man in a tailored suit Leo recognized immediately, one of Ward's legal fixers. The presses slowed, then stopped altogether. The fixer smiled politely, the kind of smile that carried no warmth. "Apologies for the disruption. This won't take long." Leo stepped forward. "On what grounds?" "This is censorship." The man adjusted his tie. Allegations of defamation and unlawful use of proprietary documents. Until the matter is resolved, these materials are to be confiscated. Caitlin felt a flash of anger cut through her fear. You're abusing the legal system, she said. And you know it. Perhaps, the man replied calmly. But the law is the law. The officers began sealing pallets, tagging stacks of freshly printed newspapers as evidence. Each sticker felt like a small execution. Leo watched silently, his hands clenched into fists. Months of investigation, nights of work, every risk they had taken, neutralized in minutes by a piece of paper and a few uniforms. When the last pallet was wheeled away, the printing hall felt hollow. The presses stood silent, useless. Leo stared at the empty floor, a crushing sense of defeat settling over him. It's over, he said under his breath. He won. For the first time since this began, Leo's certainty cracked. The truth hadn't failed, but it had been smothered. And that felt worse. Caitlin watched him carefully. She saw the exhaustion in his posture, the quiet despair he tried to hide. Something hardened inside her then. Not anger at Ward. She had expected that, but resolve. No, she said firmly. This isn't over. Leo looked at her, surprised. They seized everything. We can't print. We can't distribute. He's boxed us in. Caitlin took out her phone. He made a mistake, she said. He turned this into a visible act of censorship. She began recording, panning the camera across the empty space where the papers had been. This morning, she said clearly, local authorities confiscated the entire print run of the Beacon under a rushed court order requested by Mayor Ward's legal team. No ruling on the facts. No trial. Just silence. Leo watched as she uploaded the video, then another post, then another. Screenshots of the order. Photos of the police tags. A clear timeline. Clear framing. Within minutes, notifications started pouring in. Comments. Shares. Messages from readers, journalists, activists. You're turning a legal loss into a public one for him, Leo said slowly. Caitlin met his eyes. Exactly. He wanted quiet control. Instead, he's exposed himself. She moved closer, lowering her voice. Leo, you did your part. You proved the truth exists. Now let me protect the paper. Something shifted between them in that moment. Leo realized she wasn't just defending a business. She was defending the idea that his work mattered, that truth was worth fighting for even when it looked defeated. I'm with you, he said. Whatever comes next. She smiled, tired but fierce. Good. Because we're not done yet. Outside the printing plant, the seized newspapers were loaded into a truck and driven away. But the story had already escaped. Not on paper, not yet, but in the minds of a growing public that was beginning to ask why a mayor was so desperate to stop a small newspaper from being read. And for the first time since the confrontation began, Ward was no longer completely in control. The building had been scheduled for demolition for years, yet it still stood, wedged between newer glass offices like a forgotten memory no one wanted to claim. The old press room was buried beneath it, accessible only through a narrow stairwell hidden behind a rusted service door. Leo hadn't been down there in nearly a decade. Even he had started to believe it was unusable, a relic from a different era of journalism. They stood across the street from the entrance, rain misting the pavement, the city humming with indifference around them. You're sure it still works? Caitlin asked quietly. Leo nodded, though his certainty was built more on hope than proof. It was serviced the last time we used it. Mechanical. No network. No digital trail. If it's still intact, it's invisible. Caitlin studied the building, weighing risks the way she always did. Trespassing. Illegal printing. Potential arrest. Total reputational collapse if they failed. And yet, walking away felt impossible now. Ward had crossed a line. Silence was no longer an option. This would destroy me, she said calmly. If this comes out the wrong way, I lose everything. Investors. Future partners. Any claim to legitimacy. Leo turned to her. You don't have to do this. She looked at him, really looked at him, and shook her head. I already chose. The moment they seized the papers, this stopped being about profit. If I step back now, I become exactly what Ward thinks I am. They slipped inside just before midnight. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and dust. Each step echoed too loudly, every sound amplified by nerves. At the bottom, Leo found the door he remembered. The lock resisted, then gave way with a dull snap. The press room greeted them with silence and shadows. The old machine sat in the center, massive and inert, its steel body scarred but intact. Leo ran his hand along its side, a strange mix of reverence and urgency tightening his chest. Please, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. They worked by portable lights. Caitlin checked the exits, mapped escape routes, memorized blind spots. Leo inspected belts, rollers, oil levels. When he finally flipped the main switch, the machine hesitated, groaned. then came alive with a low, steady rumble. Caitlin exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It works," Leo said, a smile breaking through despite everything. They didn't celebrate. There was no time. Leo pulled out the final version of the investigation, the one too dangerous to publish before. Names, documents, dates, everything Ward had tried to bury. Caitlin read over his shoulder, her expression tightening with each paragraph. "Once this is out," she said, "there's no undoing it." "That's the point." She nodded. "Then we do it right." They divided tasks without discussion. Leo handled the printing. Caitlin coordinated messages, encrypted calls, quiet instructions to the few staff members she trusted absolutely. No explanations, just directions. Be ready. Be discreet. Be brave. At one point, the sound of footsteps echoed above them. Both froze. The machine kept running, impossibly loud in the silence that followed. Caitlin moved instinctively, placing herself between Leo and the stairwell, phone already in her hand. The footsteps passed. A door slammed somewhere above. The tension lingered long after the sound was gone. Leo looked at her. "You didn't hesitate." "Neither did you," she replied. They shared a look then, something unspoken but deeply understood. This wasn't just collaboration anymore. It was trust, raw and irreversible. As the first stack of freshly printed papers slid into place, the weight of what they were doing settled fully between them. This wasn't legal. It wasn't safe. But it was necessary. By the time dawn began to thin the darkness outside, the underground press room was alive with motion. Ink-stained hands. Quiet voices. Determination sharpened by fear. Caitlin leaned against the wall for a moment, exhausted, watching Leo work the machine with practiced focus. She realized she was no longer just protecting a newspaper. She was protecting him. And somehow, he was doing the same for her. Whatever happened next, they had crossed a threshold together. There was no going back. The press never truly slept. It only paused, inhaled, and then roared back to life with renewed purpose. By the time the last plates were locked into place, the basement air was thick with ink and heat, the rhythmic thump of the old machine echoing like a heartbeat beneath the city. Leo wiped his hands on a rag already stained beyond saving. "That's it," he said. "If nothing breaks, we can finish before sunrise." One by one, the others arrived. For people Caitlin trusted without question. A former layout designer who hadn't forgiven Ward for closing her community arts grant. A delivery driver whose brother had been pushed out of his home by one of the mayor's redevelopment projects. Two young interns who had stayed silent through the legal chaos but had never stopped believing in the paper. No one asked what was inside the issue. They didn't need to. The urgency was enough. Caitlin took charge immediately, her voice low but steady. "We print fast, we stack clean, and we move in waves. No phones once we start. If anything feels wrong, you stop and you leave. No heroics." Leo watched her work, impressed despite himself. She wasn't commanding through fear or authority. She was earning loyalty in real time. The machine accelerated. Pages fed through rollers, emerged crisp and undeniable. Headlines stared back at them in bold type, impossible to ignore. Ward's name, the park, the shell companies, the evidence. Truth, finally given physical form. As the stacks grew, adrenaline replaced exhaustion. Time blurred. Outside, the city remained unaware that something irreversible was happening beneath its streets. During a brief pause to replace ink, Leo leaned against the machine, breathing hard. Caitlin joined him, handing over a bottle of water. "You're shaking," she said softly. "So are you," he replied. They laughed quietly, the sound edged with relief and nerves. For a moment, the danger fell away, replaced by the simple reality that they were still standing. "This is insane," Caitlin said. "If someone had told me a month ago I'd be illegally printing a newspaper in a basement, you'd have laughed," Leo finished. She nodded. "I would have fired you." The admission surprised them both. The honesty lingered between them, heavier than the noise of the press. "When this started," Leo said, "I thought you were just trying to protect the business." "I was," she said. "But somewhere along the way, that stopped being enough." They didn't move closer, but the space between them felt charged. The machine restarted, forcing them back to work, but something had shifted. The fight had fused them together in a way neither had anticipated. Just before dawn, the final copy rolled out. Leo shut the press down, the sudden silence almost disorienting. Stacks of papers filled the room, tangible proof of defiance. Caitlin checked her watch. "It's time." Volunteers arrived in pairs, exactly as planned. No names, no explanations. Each received a bundle, a route, a single instruction. Hand them out. Doorsteps, bus stops, cafes, anywhere people would look down and read. As the last bundle disappeared up the stairwell, Caitlin and Leo stood alone again, exhaustion crashing in now that the urgency had passed. The press room felt strangely intimate in the quiet. The faint hum of cooling metal, the smell of ink, the knowledge that whatever happened next was already beyond their control. Caitlin broke the silence. "Thank you for trusting me." Leo met her gaze. "Thank you for not letting this die." For a second, neither spoke. The distance closed without either of them consciously moving. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. Just two people drawn together by shared risk and shared belief. The kiss was brief, almost hesitant, but it carried the weight of the night. Fear, resolve, relief, and something warmer underneath. When they pulled back, both seemed surprised, but neither regretted it. Outside, the first light of morning crept into the streets. Somewhere above them, doors would soon open, papers would be picked up, and the city would begin to understand what had been done in its name. Below ground, Leo and Caitlin stood side by side, ink on their hands, truth in their pockets, knowing the real consequences were about to begin. Morning broke unevenly across the city, pale light catching on windows and bus stops, on park benches and cafe tables where the first copies of the paper had been left behind. People noticed them slowly at first, then all at once. The familiar masthead of the beacon drew attention, but it was the headline that made hands stop mid-motion, eyes narrow, breaths catch. By 7 o'clock, photos of the front page were already spreading online. Caitlin watched the numbers climb from the small conference room that had become their temporary command center. The main newsroom was still legally sealed, but the story didn't need desks or screens anymore. It was moving on its own. "They're reading it," Leo said quietly, refreshing his feed again and again. "They're really reading it." Comments poured in, shock, anger, disbelief. Former city employees spoke up. Environmental groups shared the article with statements of support. Someone posted drone footage of the park taken years earlier, overlaying it with the proposed development lines mentioned in the investigation. By mid-morning, people had gathered at the park itself. It started with a handful of residents holding up copies of the paper, then grew into a crowd. Homemade signs appeared. Someone brought a megaphone. Ward's office responded with a statement just after 10. False allegations. Stolen documents. An irresponsible attack on the city's economic future. The language was sharp, dismissive, rehearsed. "It's not landing," Caitlin said, scanning reactions. "They're not buying it." "They can't," Leo replied. He tried to erase the paper. "That's the story now." The mayor escalated. A press conference was announced for noon, framing the underground issue as criminal misconduct. Threats of further legal action followed within minutes. Caitlin leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her resolve was unmistakable. "Good. We respond publicly." Leo hesitated. "If you step out front like that." "I know," she said, but hiding now only helps him. They arrived at the steps of City Hall to a scene neither had fully anticipated. Cameras. Reporters from outlets that had ignored the beacon for years. Activists. Ordinary residents clutching folded newspapers like evidence. Caitlin stepped to the microphones first. She spoke clearly, without notes. "This morning, our paper was accused of acting illegally," she said. "Let me be very clear. What is illegal is the use of public land for private gain. What is illegal is silencing journalists to protect political power." She held up the seized court order, printed and highlighted. "This was used to suppress a story before it could be read. We refused to let that happen." Leo followed, answering questions, explaining sources, laying out the facts with calm precision. Every attempt to frame the paper as reckless collapsed under the weight of documented proof. Across the square, chants rose from the crowd at the park, carried by wind and momentum. The mayor's office canceled its press conference less than an hour later. By late afternoon, city council members began issuing statements distancing themselves from Ward. Environmental regulators announced a review of the development permits. Advertisers who had once been untouchable quietly pulled their support from the mayor's initiatives. Caitlin's phone buzzed nonstop. Donations continued to climb. Subscriptions surged. Not out of pity, but conviction. As the sun dipped lower, she and Leo stood at the edge of the park, watching families and protesters share the same space. The grass, the trees, the land that had started all of this. "We did this," Leo said, disbelief still coloring his voice. "We didn't," Caitlin replied. "They did. We just refused to stay silent." She turned to him, her expression softer now, steadier. "No matter what happens next, the paper survives. And so does the truth." For the first time since the investigation began, Leo allowed himself to believe it. The story had escaped every attempt to contain it. It belonged to the people now. And somewhere in his office, far from the crowd and the cameras, Mayor Ward was learning a lesson he had never expected, that once the truth reached the public, power could no longer control where it went. The legal process moved slower than outrage, but it moved under far heavier pressure. Within days of the public revelations, emergency sessions of the city council were called, each one more crowded than the last. Citizens filled every seat, copies of the Beacon folded on their laps like reminders of why they were there. Leo sat beside Caitlin in the back row during the first hearing, watching council members shift uncomfortably as evidence was projected onto the wall. Contracts, maps, email exchanges that had never been meant to see daylight. Ward's legal team tried to regain control with procedure and delay. They challenged sources, questioned jurisdiction, demanded sealed reviews. It might have worked in quieter times, but the city was no longer quiet. Every postponement was met with protests. Every attempt to dismiss the case triggered another wave of coverage, another spike in public support. What had begun as a local paper's investigation had become a test of the city's integrity. Caitlin coordinated relentlessly. She brought in environmental law specialists, negotiated pro bono representation, and connected advocacy groups with city officials who were suddenly eager to appear cooperative. Her financial instincts were as sharp as ever, but now they served a different goal: sustainability without compromise. Leo testified during one of the early sessions. He spoke plainly, without drama, walking through his reporting step by step, where the documents came from, how they fit together, why the park mattered. When Ward's attorney tried to frame him as biased, Leo didn't argue. He simply replied, "The facts don't care what I believe." The room went silent. Behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Regulators issued formal violations. Independent auditors confirmed the shell companies. The emergency court order that had justified the seizure of the print run was quietly overturned, labeled procedurally flawed. 2 weeks after the underground issue was distributed, the final vote was held. Caitlin watched the council members one by one. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked relieved, as if grateful to finally choose the obvious. "The redevelopment agreement is hereby annulled," the council chair announced. Effective immediately, the room erupted. Applause, cheers, tears. Leo felt a hand grip his arm. Caitlin's, steady and warm. Outside City Hall, reporters surged forward. Questions flew. Cameras flashed. "This isn't just a legal victory," Caitlin said into the microphones. "It's proof that transparency isn't a threat to stability. It's the foundation of it." Later that evening, they returned to the newsroom for the first time since it had been sealed. The locks were gone. Dust covered the desks. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a space that felt both familiar and newly earned. Leo stood in the center of the room, taking it in. "We're still here," he said. "We're stronger," Caitlin corrected. Financial reports confirmed it days later. Subscriptions had stabilized. Ethical advertisers had stepped in. The paper wasn't just surviving. It was viable, independent, and finally free from the kind of influence that had nearly destroyed it. Ward resigned quietly before the formal ethics investigation concluded. His name faded from headlines faster than he expected. That night, Leo and Caitlin sat alone in the newsroom, sharing takeout over a cluttered desk. There was no celebration, no speeches, just a shared understanding of what they had protected. "We proved something," Leo said. "Yes," Caitlin replied, "that you don't have to choose between truth and survival." The paper lived. The park was safe. And together, they had rewritten the ending that power had tried to dictate. Time softened the sharp edges of the crisis, but it never erased the memory of what it had cost. Months passed, and with them came a quieter, steadier rhythm. The Beacon no longer chased survival week to week. It planned. It grew. The newsroom looked different now. New desks, new faces, a subscription board mounted on the wall, updated every Friday, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of who the paper answered to. Readers, not sponsors. Caitlin arrived early most mornings, coffee in hand, hair still slightly damp, scanning financial reports before the city fully woke up. She had reshaped the business from the inside out. Ethical advertisers, reader-funded investigations, transparent budgets published quarterly. Younger than most owners in the industry, she carried herself with a confidence earned the hard way. Leo came in later, usually with notes already scribbled in the margins of a draft. His role had changed too. He no longer worked alone in the shadows. He mentored reporters, challenged them, taught them how to dig without losing themselves in the process. They argued, often, about headlines, about resource allocation, about how far to push a story. But the arguments were different now, productive, grounded in trust rather than suspicion. On a warm afternoon, they walked through the park that had nearly been erased. Children played where construction fences had once been planned. New signs explained the land's protected status, the result of policy changes sparked by the investigation. Caitlin stopped near one of the older trees, resting her hand against its bark. This almost didn't exist, she said. Leo nodded. Neither did the paper. They stood there in silence, aware of how close everything had come to collapse. The victory wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need to be. That evening, the final layout of a special anniversary issue filled the screens back at the office. Not a celebration of themselves, but a reflection on accountability, on how small institutions could still challenge power. Caitlin closed her laptop and looked at Leo. We balance each other, she said simply. He smiled. Principle and pragmatism. Truth and survival. They locked up together, lights going dark one by one. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet partnership that now watched it closely. The beacon endured, not as a relic, but as proof. Proof that honesty could be sustainable, that courage could be shared, and that sometimes the strongest alliances were forged not in comfort, but in the moment when walking away would have been easier. They walked home side by side, not thinking about tomorrow's headlines, content with the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.